Yes.
Yes, this is Queen Quet, Gwine, representing the Gullah Geechee Nation and the International Human Rights Association for American Minorities. There are a couple of points I wanted to point out in the draft, and one is number 31, and the other will be 33. In 31, one of the things that I also would suggest be added to this is that sufficient financial resources should be provided for minority intellectual property. And what I mean by that is more often than not, when minority groups are asked to serve on commissions or boards or to consult even with those in academic forums and so forth, they are asked to do it on a voluntary basis, but they are not often considered quote-unquote experts in that particular subject, which is about themselves. So they don't get hired as the consultants and they don't get the funding for that. So even as we talk about the various ways that you're mentioning sufficient resources for projects, we also should consider why many times these projects are not supported by the minority groups, or the minorities will begin with it but not complete the process. And part of it is directly tied to them seeing others getting paid for things and them being asked to volunteer. So that was something that stood out for me in that section, and I saw it in other portions in the other document. And then in 33, I notice, and I support what is stated here in most of it, but I also am concerned because I did not see where it said that there would be an inclusion of traditional minority group leaders in a panel that might be formed for such educational practices about the human rights of minorities. And one of the things that I have found, being someone that not only serves in a traditional capacity in my community and represent my people traditionally, in the United States, where we are also a part of the United States with the islands going from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, the Sea Islands, what we found is that then when we're asked to serve on boards that might be state or federal boards in particular, then the titles of leaders that are traditional titles, we are expected to be stripped of those titles to serve on that board, wherein board members that have titles that are already within American society can uphold those titles and have them utilized. So then it appears to the community that you're not only disrespecting one individual, but you're disrespecting the entire minority group, because if that is who they chose to lead them under a particular title, then that title should also be respected. So now if that person isn't respected, the entire group again will not participate actively or peaceably, possibly, in a situation that it could be. And so I'm just concerned throughout when we design this and these recommendations that the actual people who are traditional leaders chosen by the minority, not chosen by the majority because they accept the individual, but chosen from the minority, that they are included within these processes that we're talking about overall.
Simon Woolley, in response to Yvette's challenge, I'm not quite sure where it should go, but I do think a statement of minority unity and solidarity with our challenge for empowerment should be stated. And I would go further in that and kind of explore it more, that as a European, all our black and minority ethnic communities in Europe should be lobbying our countries to fight for Greece to repeal these measures. They're part of the European Union. So we have to play our part in lobbying. And there may be other examples in which we can lobby, which we can support, even just by having the dialogue with our fellow minorities in Greece, to say to them, you're not alone, and we will do our part in your struggle.
May I ask a question just on my behalf? Having read the recommendations and thinking about the terminologies, I think some discussion was around terminologies. Using the term minorities, it seems to me that many of our societies and history has not been about minority in numbers, but a dominant group that may not be pluralistic, I mean, may not be in greater numbers, but dominate over a population that has greater numbers. Is there a distinction to be made in terms of dominance versus the number of people in a population that's considered a minority? Because it does address itself to power, dominance, and control. And I guess what we're looking at, the effort is to have those of us who have been schooled into subjecting ourselves to the dominant forces is re-educating ourselves to take our own place in the sun, I suppose, but also convincing those who are in dominant positions to make those rooms or create those rooms. And I guess I'm reminded of a phrase that power is never shared, it's taken. And I guess we're trying to redefine that as trying to find ways to share, get our fair share of that dominant position so that there is more of a balance in the issue of rulemaking, I guess. It's just a thought.
Let me just, Congressman Hondo, let me just direct your attention to the first footnote on page 1 of the draft recommendations. It doesn't cover all of your point, but it attempts to help on some part of the point you were making. Okay?
Yes, I simply had a question, and I'm glad that the last question was asked because it ties right to mine, about is there a sub-minority to minority? Because, for instance, Gullah Geechees are a linguistic and ethnic minority, and they're now to some degree recognized in the U.S. as a national minority through the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Act. But when the discussion of minority takes place on a domestic level, for a number of reasons pointed out here about the use of the word minority, then we're classified again just in a larger, broader spectrum group, just referred to as African Americans. So then it takes away any focus on linguistic and ethnic rights. It tends to leave that subject out. And so that is my concern within these documents. How do we deal with the minority of the minority group, in essence?
Well, just to speak to that point, you'll see that we have made that some of these provisions address directly the language issue, yes, which is a very important issue with respect to the rights of minorities. So it's generally, if you go through them, you'll see there's some very specific points where we address the needs of linguistic minorities in political processes. So.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Dentro de lo que se ha venido hablando acá,
we have been discussing here,
ha resultado una pregunta.
a question arises about the characteristics or the self-recognition of what is a minority in a particular country. As an example, in our Colombian constitution, there is a definition of they have to be, it says they have to be black, but it has to be within the country. A census was carried out, and there was a definition of those who are recognized as Afro-Colombians and those who don't. But and so how do you recommend to the government to deal with this?